The Battle of Incheon was one of the most daring and decisive military operations of the Korean War. With a surprise landing strategy led by General Douglas MacArthur, the United Nations turned the tide, relieved the siege of Seoul, and stopped the advance of the North Korean army. In this program, we will explore the reason for choosing Incheon as the landing point, the risky planning process of the operation, the tense developments and unexpected results of the battle. Let's find out why this operation is considered one of the greatest military feats of the 20th century. The Battle of Incheon was a landing battle at Incheon, with decisive significance to destroy the North Korean army during the Korean War. The battle began on September 15, 1950, and ended around September 28. During the landing campaign, UN forces captured Incheon and broke out of the Pusan perimeter through a series of landings in territory occupied by the Communists. The Democratic People's Republic of Korea. The majority of the UN ground forces involved in the assault were United States Marines under the supreme command of General Douglas MacArthur. The Battle of Incheon ended a series of successive victories by the North Korean People's Army, and also began a counterattack by UN forces that led to the recapture of Seoul. The invasion of the Democratic People's Republic of Korea ended near the Yalu River, and the People's Republic of China felt threatened by the possibility that the US-led coalition might use North Korea as a springboard for future invasions. China therefore entered the war by deploying nearly 100,000 troops to support the Democratic People's Republic of Korea. The Chinese overran UN positions along the Sinchung River and forced the UN forces to retreat to the Republic of Korea, also known as South Korea. Korea or South Korea, after the Battle of Changing Reservoir. But the Allied forces then repelled the Chinese advance north. Background and plan of the battle. The idea of landing UN forces at Incheon was proposed by General Douglas MacArthur. After he visited Korea on June 29, 1950, 4 days after the war began, MacArthur thought that the North Korean People's Army would push the South Korean army far back from Seoul. He was convinced that the Rogue Army was under-equipped, unmotivated, and would be crushed, unable to hold off the advance of the North Korean People's Army even with reinforcements from the United States. MacArthur felt that he could turn the tide if he moved decisively behind the North Korean lines. He hoped that an invasion of Incheon would allow him to sever the North Korean army and destroy it as an elite fighting force, thus helping the Allies win the war. To accomplish such a large amphibious operation, MacArthur requested the use of the United States Marine Corps Expeditionary Forces, which were familiar with amphibious operations during the Pacific War of World War II. However, the Marine Corps was still recovering from the massive training cuts initiated by the administrations of President Harry Truman and Secretary of Defense Louis Johnson. Johnson had attempted to eliminate the Marine Corps altogether, and had cut the Marine Expeditionary Force from its World War II peak of 300,000 men to just over 27,000. Many of the transports and amphibious transports were sold, dismantled for scrap, or transferred to the United States Army, after hastily re-equipping the Marine Corps with obsolete World War II transports. Withdrawing Marine units from the Pusan perimeter, and emptying recruiting centers, Marine commanders were able to rebuild a force capable of active offensive operations. The initial plan was met with skepticism by other commanders because the man-made and natural defenses were formidable. The approach to Incheon was limited to two narrow passages, the Phi Ngu Channel and the East Sea, which were prone to minefields. The tides in both straits were fast and dangerous. Finally, the small anchorage and harbor were surrounded by sea walls. We drew up a list of geographical and natural obstacles, and Incheon had them all, noted Commander Ali Caps. These problems, along with the advancing North Korean army, forced MacArthur to abandon his original plan, Operation Blue Hearts, which called for an amphibious landing at Incheon in July 1950. In September, despite these obstacles, MacArthur presented a revised plan for an attack on Incheon, Plan 100B, codenamed Operation Chromite. A briefing by Admiral James Doyle concluded that, "The best I can say is that Incheon is not impossible." The officers at the briefing spent much of their time asking about other landing sites such as Kunsam. MacArthur spent the next 45 minutes explaining his reasons for choosing Incheon. He said that because it was heavily defended, the North Koreans would not expect an attack there, that victory at Incheon would avoid a bitter winter campaign, and that, by penetrating a strong point in the north, UN forces could cut North Korean lines of communication and supply. Incheon was also chosen because of its proximity to Seoul. Admiral Forrest Sherman and General Lawton Collins returned to Washington to present the landing plan and seek approval. The landing at Incheon was not the first large-scale amphibious operation since World War II. The other landing was on the 18th of July 1950 at Pohang. However, that operation was not conducted in North Korean-held territory and did not involve any fighting. Before the landing, 7 days before the main attack on Incheon, a joint Central Intelligence Agency military intelligence reconnaissance mission codenamed Trudy Jackson landed a group of guerrillas in Incheon. The group, led by Navy Lieutenant Eugene Clark, landed on Yonghung, an island facing the harbor. From there, they relayed intelligence back to the US forces. With the help of local people, the guerrillas gathered information on tides, mudflats, seawalls, and North Korean redoubts. The most important contribution to the mission was the reactivation of a lighthouse on Palmy-do. When the North Koreans discovered that Allied agents had entered the peninsula, they sent an assault boat with 16 soldiers. Eugene Clark mounted a machine gun on a small boat and sank the attack boat. In retaliation, the North Koreans killed over 50 civilians for helping Clark. A series of exercises and tests were conducted along the Korean coast where conditions were similar to Incheon before an actual landing. The exercises were used to gauge the timing and performance of the amphibious assaults. As the landing parties neared their destination, cruisers and destroyers from the UN navies opened fire on Womi-do and cleared the Phi Ngu Strait of mines. The 1st Canadian Forces entered the Korean War when the battleships HMCS Cayuga, HMCS Athabaskan, and HMCS Sioux bombarded the coast. The Carrier Rapid Response Force conducted air support, interdiction, and ground attack missions. Destroyer Squadron 9, led by USS Mansfield, entered the East Strait and entered Incheon Harbor, firing on the large North Korean gun emplacements. The attacks convinced the North Koreans that an invasion was imminent. The officer stationed at Womi-do assured his superiors that he would throw the enemy back into the sea. The battle. The landing craft squadron in this battle was commanded by Arthur Dewey Struble. He was a specialist in amphibious warfare. Struble had participated in the sea-to-shore landings of World War II, including the Battle of Leyte and the Battle of Normandy. Green Beach. At 6:30 on September 15, 1950, the leading elements of the U.S. Army's 10th Corps reached Green Beach, on the northern part of Womi Island. The landing force consisted of the 3rd Battalion, 5th Marine Regiment, and 9 M26 Pershing tanks from the 1st Tank Battalion. One tank was equipped with a tank flamethrower, and 2 others had bulldozer blades. The landing party was a Yangtze River landing ship designed and built during World War II, 1939 to 1945. The entire island was captured by noon at a cost of 14 casualties. North Korean casualties included over 200 killed and 136 captured, mostly from the 918th Artillery Regiment and the 226th Marine Regiment. The forces on Green Beach had to wait until 1950 for the tide to rise so that another force could land. During this time, heavy bombardment and artillery fire, along with anti-tank mines, pounded the only bridge to keep the North Koreans from launching a significant counterattack. The second wave came ashore at Red Beach and Blue Beach. The North Korean People's Army had not expected an invasion of Incheon. After the overwhelming assault on Green Beach, the North Korean People's Army had assumed, perhaps because of deliberate misinformation by American counterintelligence, that the main amphibious assault would occur at Kunsam. As a result, only a small force was sent to Incheon. Even those forces arrived late, arriving after the UN forces had taken Blue Beach and Red Beach. The troops previously stationed at Incheon had been weakened by Clark's guerrillas, and napalm bombardments had destroyed major ammunition dumps. A total of 261 ships were involved. Red Beach. Red Beach forces included Combat Team 5 of the 5th Marine Regiment, which used ladders to scale the seawalls. After neutralizing the North Korean defenses, they opened the seawall to Womi, allowing tanks from Green Beach to enter the battle. The Red Beach forces suffered 8 dead and 28 wounded. Blue Beach. Under the command of Colonel Louis Chesty Puller, the 1st Marine Regiment landed at Blue Beach, slightly south of the other 2 beaches, and reached the final beach. When they reached the beach, combined fire from North Korean gun emplacements sank a transport ship. Cruiser fire and bombardment destroyed the North Korean defenders. When they finally arrived, the North Korean forces at Incheon had surrendered, so the Blue Beach forces suffered few casualties and encountered little resistance. The 1st Marines spent much of their time consolidating the beachhead and preparing for an inland push. Breakthrough. Kimpo Airfield. Kimpo Airfield was the largest and most important airfield on the Korean peninsula. On September 17, General MacArthur ordered that Kimpo Airfield be recaptured as quickly as possible. Once Kimpo Airfield was under control, the 5th Air Force and the USMC could easily deploy fighters and bombers from Japan against the North Koreans. The mission to attack the airfield was assigned to the 2nd Battalion, 5th Marines. Attempts to recapture the airfield on the nights of the 17th and 18th by the North Koreans, with the remaining forces not yet withdrawn from the Ha River under the command of Colonel Van Yong, were repelled by well-organized U.S. Marine infantry and artillery. When the entire North Korean force withdrew the next morning, the airfield remained largely intact, as the North Koreans had not had time to carry out a large-scale demolition. And, in fact, a few North Korean fighter planes were left behind. Kimpo Airfield now became the center of United Nations coalition air operations. Second Battle of Seoul. Aftermath. Landing Beach. As soon as North Korean resistance was crushed at Incheon, supplies and reinforcements began. Navy construction battalions and underwater mine clearance teams arrived with the U.S. Marines to build a floating dock on Green Beach and clear underwater obstacles. The dock was then used to unload the remaining cargo on the transports. Documents written by Kim Il-sung and captured by the UN forces shortly after the landing stated, "The original plan was to end the war in a month, but we were unable to crush 4 American divisions. We were taken by surprise when the UN troops and the US Navy and Air Force entered." On September 16, the North Koreans, realizing their mistake, brought 6 rows of T-34 tanks to the landing beach. In response, 2 squadrons of F-4U Corsairs from VMF 214 bombed the attacking tanks. The air attack damaged or destroyed half of the tanks and lost 1 aircraft. A quick counterattack by M26 Pershing tanks destroyed the remainder of the North Korean mechanized division and cleared the way for the capture of Incheon. On the 19th of September, the U.S. Corps of Engineers repaired an 8-mile, 13 kilometers, stretch of local railroad to the mainland. Gimpo Airport was captured and transport planes began delivering fuel and ammunition to the aircraft based at Incheon. The Marines continued to unload supplies and received reinforcements. By the 22nd of September, they had loaded 6.629 vehicles and 53.882 troops, along with 23.000 tons of supplies. Busan Perimeter Breakthrough. The last fighting North Korean units in the Republic of Korea were defeated when General Walker's U.S. 8th Army broke through the Busan perimeter, and together with the 10th Army Corps launched a coordinated attack on the North Korean forces. Of the 70.000 North Korean troops around Busan, more than half were killed or captured. However, since UN forces were focused on capturing Seoul rather than cutting off the North Koreans' northern retreat, some 30.000 remaining North Koreans escaped north across the Yalu River, where they were soon rebuilt as a foil for the formation of new North Korean divisions hastily rearmed by the Soviet Union. The UN offensive continued north to the Yalu River until the People's Republic of China intervened in the war. Thank you very much for your interest in following our program.